Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World, where every word matters. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Under the leadership of Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, Hungary has positioned itself as a controversial figure within the European Union, often diverging from the bloc's consensus on key issues. Most recently, Hungary blocked a joint EU statement condemning the Belarusian presidential election as undemocratic, while also threatening to veto sanctions against Russia. Now, these actions raise questions about Hungary's alignment with EU values and its growing isolation within the bloc. Joining us today on TVP World to explore why cooperation with Hungary under Orbán's leadership has become so difficult is Wojciech Przybylski, Editor-in-Chief of Visegrad Insight. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you for having me. Welcome.
So, on the Russian front, I can sort of understand perhaps Hungary do want to have access to the cheap Russian energy and gas, and that, of course, is not welcome, but could probably be an argument of why Hungary is aligning with Moscow. But what's the case with Belarus? Why is it in Hungary's interest or Orbán's interest whatsoever to kind of not join in on a statement of declaring this election as undemocratic?
Well, frankly, I don't know. And I don't know if anybody knows.
It's very confusing. It does seem like it's a thorn on the European Union side. Do you think at some point it's kind of a contrarian position that Orbán is taking, kind of just to disrupt the function of the European Union?
Well, clearly, if that is his only intention, we don't have much to say about his action, as they are driven not by interests of the Hungary or his political interests as a prime minister, but some sort of lunacy.
Do you think this is going to have impact on Hungary's standing with the European Union as a whole? Well, of course, it's plenty obvious, but how far can this go? Do you see any potential long-term consequences if Hungary keeps going down this line?
If Hungary wants to be friends with Belarus, it's free choice of Hungary and Hungarians. They can exit EU, they can exit NATO. It's the decision of the prime minister. He doesn't need even approval of the parliament to do that. So there he can go. It's a question what will be repercussions on behalf of the general public in Hungary, and I don't think the general public is yet there to support that kind of a call.
Right. I'm also curious about Hungary's stance when it comes to all of this, especially with this alignment with Moscow. Now, going back to what we were talking about before, there's possibly an argument to be made because they want cheap energy with a better economy driven by said cheap energy, perhaps for his own domestic consumption politically. But do you think that what he's doing right now bodes well within his own constituent, or do you think that people within Hungary will see that as sort of this unity within the European Union as something alarming as well?
Well, frankly, I think he's in a desperate position. Mr. Orbán is in a desperate position precisely because he lost access to affordable and very cheap, actually, Russian gas delivered through Ukraine. None of his hard rhetoric about the EU and then the sanction policy has ever materialized. He had to backtrack on his positions, like many times before. Mm-hmm. He is backtracking on his veto threats and hard language, because ultimately it's a country which is dependent on the goodwill of cooperation with between the other EU member states and Hungary. And Mr. Orbán in Hungary has the main trading relationship, the main economic relations, mostly with the rest of the EU. Now, his precarious situation in politics is primarily due to lack of this cheap gas that he has been using as a political currency for every elections. And as elections are coming up in less than a year and a half, he knows already it will be increasingly difficult. He's fighting for survival to get not even cheaper prices, but maintain the same prices on energy for every voter that will see the bill in the coming months.
And speaking of cooperation with the European Union, do you foresee any future scenario where Hungary could be persuaded to align more closely with EU consensus on topics like Belarus or Russia?
Well, clearly there is a difference between Russia and Belarus. Today we've seen that.
Right.
Mr. Orbán disrupted the process of political statements on Belarus, and not for the first time. He has been reluctant to condemn undemocratic elections, undemocratic processes, authoritarian rule in Belarus a few times before. So that's not new in a way, but on Russia, we see that when it comes to real interests and attentions that involve also an American counterpart, like a telephone call Mr. Rubio had with Mr. Szijjártó, the Secretary of State and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Hungary, yesterday on Sunday, has shown that Hungary is able or is feeling that it has to come on board with the rest of the democratic world and apply sanctions or whatever other policies that protect key security interests of the West, of the European Union and NATO. And we've seen that on display. So yes, in short, Mr. Orbán is talking a lot about sovereignty, but neither his actions are increasing sovereignty. In fact, it's the opposite. Nor Hungary is able to act as it was one nation's independent and free to choose whatever it wants in the world, because it acts within an alliance, economic and security alliance.
All right. Here's my take on Orbán's position about Hungary within the European Union. Let me know if you kind of see it the same way. It does seem like Orbán's looking at this whole alliance not as a sort of partnership, but more like how can this benefit me? So in a way, when, like you mentioned, perhaps when he sees it's beneficial for him to lift some of these vetoes, he would do that. So for the European Union, do you think that there needs to be some sort of approach to bring him back into line to kind of rebuild the cohesiveness of the union in and of itself?
Mr. Orbán has seen all the carrots, but I think the union has mostly sticks that can encourage him to take the right decisions and to align. And he has shown that he's getting on board a number of times already in the past, with considerable effort of the rest of the union, with a lot of irritation across the union. And each time also he downgrades its sovereignty, the sovereignty of Hungary, because it undermines how dependent Hungary is on the benevolent approach of the rest of the partners within NATO and EU.
All right, can you help us elaborate a little bit on that as well? I think, like you rightfully mentioned, even though Orbán hammers on about the sovereignty from the EU, wouldn't this over-reliance on Russian energy just kind of give away that sovereignty just to another, even more aggressive nation instead?
Well, that's here we have a clear example of a Hungary, which is a landlocked country, and has wasted decades of opportunities to diversify its energy supplies. In a way, it signed a death warrant on its sovereignty, energy sovereignty, doing so. It believed that it can overcome any crisis and talk its way out by making nice with the autocratic powers that are competing with the West, China and Russia. But it turns that its overall dependency on economic relations, trade, and also legal obligations within the EU are much stronger and are preventing Mr. Orbán to conduct the kind of policy he wished he could do. And then his options are ultimately limited. So instead of increasing sovereignty over the past years, he's only ripped off political benefits of cheap gas for the time being when it was available from Russia. Now that it is not available, it exposes his dependencies. And therefore, Mr. Orbán is a sign of decreasing sovereignty of Hungary.
Right now, I'm also observing a relatively similar situation in another country, Slovakia, who also initially refused to sign the Belarus statement, but actually later on joined in the EU consensus. What does this divergence between Hungary and Slovakia reveal about the regional dynamics?
It's a different country with quite a different political dynamics. Mr. Fico is also not as strong in his mandate to carry out his mandate as a prime minister. His majority is in jeopardy. He has just survived an attempt of a non-confidence vote, but further challenges are coming in the parliament. He himself might be a hardliner, but the rest of the party might not, and wants to play nice with the rest of the EU, understanding that there is a lot of pragmatic relationship, and also not wanting to follow Hungary's track of isolation within the EU, because that costs money.
All right, so do you think that this model that Slovakia is following could be something perhaps convincing enough to Hungary as an example to follow suit?
Not when Mr. Orbán is in power. He's also in power so long as political power is perhaps doing something to the brain as a narcotic and changes the perception of reality. Mr. Orbán behaves like he's ruling Hungary forever, and that he's going to continue. Doesn't seem likely that he's diverting from the road of continuing autocratization of the country and trying anything else but to please those foreign and hostile autocrats, hostile to the EU and NATO, which seems hardly acceptable. Even if he diverted from this path, it wouldn't be necessarily forgiven by all the other partners. So it's a dead end for Mr. Orbán. It's a matter of time. How long can he keep the power in Hungary, and how much damage he'll bring to his own country?
All right. Thank you for breaking all that down for us. I really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on TVP World. Cheers.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.